advocate in Spain.
Sila
And
Marcelo
then
del Pilar is especially mga ganyan. Yeah.
and then Schumacher says that yung second phase nun was when Rizal in particular started to want to talk directly to Filipinos. This was sometime I think in I would say 1892, thereabouts. Yung break was 1892. And yung quote dito kay Rizal is that the medicine must be brought to the patient, di ba? So and that was partly
Wait, that's a quote from Rizal? Oh wow, that's a
dapat
very good quote. Oh,
dapat
nice.
ilapit ang gamot sa pasyente or something. I
Nice.
forget which language he used, but yun yung metaphor doon. He loved medical metaphors, of
Of
course,
course,
because
he's
he
a
was
doctor. Yeah.
So of course, umuwi siya. And the Noli was kind of part of that, di ba? Because yung Noli opens with Ami Patria. So ang audience mo doon, to my country or to my fatherland, Ami Patria, right? So napaka-clear na ng dedication. He wants to talk to Filipinos. And then after writing Noli, all roads led back to the Philippines na. Right? So yun yung kind of second phase. So Luna
Right.
is, for me, you can clearly situate him in yung first phase. Although may mga nationalist, may mga kind of possible paintings then that hint at a kind of more pro-independence nationalist position. Like for example, yung kanyang yung El Pacto de Sangre, yung painting where yung blood compact ni Legazpi at saka ni
Which is yeah.
Right? So there are possible parang
That's the break na.
pro-independence
That's the break.
arguments there.
That's the break from Madre España.
Kasi there are two ways to read that. It's either you believe that the pact is sacred, or you believe that the pact has been broken, and therefore you can demand for independence.
That's an interesting read. I'll push back a little bit and say actually Juan Luna, I think, evolved, especially when he designed the uniform of the Filipino revolutionaries, right? I mean, and this is where I think I'm following Nick Joaquin, and the argument with Nick Joaquin was for a very long time, the Luna brothers wanted to work it through the system. But once they all got tortured because they were implicated by Bonifacio, especially in the case of General Luna, they kind of switched and said, okay, let's go. Let's go for it. And so, especially at the time of Americans, no? That's where I think the Lunas go full on revolutionary mode.
Yeah.
But this is American time. So so actually you're correct. But I'm saying there's an evolution.
The is that the Lunas are extremely vague about the anti-Spanish phase of the Philippine Revolution, diba? Because he says that Joaquin says they're practically Hispanophile Creoles. So Creoles are Spaniards born in the Philippines, right? But because, or Spaniards born in the colonies. But because konti lang naman yung pure Spaniards born in the Philippines, when you speak of a Filipino Creole class, you're really referring to either mga halo na, or people who just imbibe that broader metropolitan Creolist culture, right? So a Filipino Creolo need not be 100% white. And Nick is making the point that effectively the Luna brothers were Creole, and that you need to understand their resistance to Americans through the lens of Creolism, which was a kind of attachment to a Hispanic Philippines. And of course, Americans were perceived as a threat to Hispanic Philippines.
And then they were kind of like Bolivarian in that sense, right? Kind of like classic Bolivarian or Marti kind of style. Now, what do you understand of his art as far as Juan Luna is concerned? Because I had Jorge Mojaro the other month when I came back from Madrid, and I don't think he was as impressed with Luna. His ideas it's too classical, etc. But for me, I think brilliant yung work ni Luna. I mean, I don't care if it's not cutting edge cubism, whatever. But I think that's where you come in, diba? Na, that was his thing. He wanted to show that I can beat you in your own game, and he kind of did that, right? Actually, I didn't know this, bro. Maybe you're more informed. Apparently, the Spolarium, the Spanish did not allow him to exhibit it in Paris. That's why it was not even part. Now, a part of me suspects because this Jaime no Jaime, this got the bronze, right? My sense is, who knows if Spolarium was allowed to compete in Paris? He could have won also another gold medal or something like that. Because the argument of the people who found the Jaime no Jaime is no, Paris is the Olympics. Ano, palarong pambansa lang daw yung sa Madrid. Like, come on, that's mean. Hindi naman gano'n kalo ang Spain nung late 19th century. Hindi naman gano'n, bro!
That's what I get also na parang artistic backwater na ang Spain by that time. Because remember, this was a crumbling empire.
I get it, but it wasn't that bad na parang if you win in Madrid, it's the gold there is like whatever.
It was a poor and crumbling empire, and then there was a perception that the height of that the height of Spain had passed. And yes, Paris was a metropolitan center at that time, but then also Vienna was also another center at that time
Right. Fin de
actually,
cycle.
you know,
Yeah.
soon after in Vienna, that's where you get the kind, hindi pa during this period, but a few decades after, you get the kind of more experimental. I don't know the term, I'm not an art historian, but that's where you
Yeah,
start
yeah, yeah.
getting people like Ion Schiele,
Yeah,
Gustav
yeah. I see
Klimt,
what you're
right?
saying. Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
more interesting stuff. There are greater avant-garde tendencies there. Then of course you get Freud in Vienna eventually, right?
Makes sense.
That kind of
Makes
excitement, you know, which is really not happening in Spain. It's happening in Paris and Vienna. Having said that, one thing that Ambeth loves to correct is that you say he did not get the bronze or the gold. He got a bronze and a gold.
Yeah, I understand. It's one of the categories. Yeah, I understand.
Which is
You're right.
what that means is that hindi ito parang tatlo lang yung mananalo first, second, third. Ang nangyayari dito is that you had paintings and they were assessed and they were given a medal
Yeah,
based
different
on
categories. Yeah.
what class the judges thought they belonged to. So you know, gold class, which means top tier, and then bronze class, meaning
Yeah.
third tier. So I mean, make of that what you will, but it's not the bronze; it's a bronze, right?
Right.
That's what Ambeth
Although,
always says.
in fairness naman, parang I got to know that the category that Juan Luna was placed in when he competed in Paris is like for the masters category. And the first time I heard about it was when I was reading about Picasso, and when he had his most famous painting also exhibited in Paris. It was considered for the non-competition category, masters category, or something like that. So for me, in Paris, there was a recognition that he's one of the masters, right? So in a way, he was recognized as a part of the pantheons of European artists. Because I see what you're saying. First, it's an A gold, not the gold, and B, well, he won it in Spain, blah blah. And C, he was. So these are the three arguments against Luna's work. No, I'm talking about just the work, not the person. And C is like he was not really at the cutting edge of new. But that's the point that he was put in the category of masters in Paris, which is the culmination. So he was in the pantheon.
Interesting for me to because when we talk about Philippine art, the only Filipino artist that nationalists are willing to consider based on European metropolitan terms is Luna, di ba? Meaning kasi marami namang artists after that that try to compete with the white people and say, I'm just as good as you, right? But Filipino nationalists don't take them as seriously as Luna. So for example, si Constancio Bernardo, he went to Yale and he participated in the New York abstract expressionism of the mid 20th century. Do you get Filipino nationalists who make the argument that we should think of Constancio Bernardo as comparable to de Kooning? Nobody does that, right? Or for example, the architect Locsin. Do you get nationalists going, Locsin is so great, we should compare him to the European masters of brutalism. We should think about him along the same lines as Le Corbusier. Nobody does that.
Yeah.
So there's something about Luna wherein parang nationalists are willing to buy into accept the criteria of the white people.
Yeah, I mean, ganito, bro. Yeah, I know the paradox of that. I get what you're saying. Like, you love Luna for his revolutionariness, and then but you appreciate this art for the colonial powers recognition of it. It was like that's like weird. But bro, I can use the same argument. I would say Nick Joaquin's prose is just as good as Rizal's, if not better.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And unlike Rizal, there's no accusation that he copied someone else's script. I mean, you know the accusation against Rizal, right? Noli was a little bit similar to one thing written by one of... you know what I'm talking about, right? I actually... napaisip ako dun eh. But I said, okay, artistic license
They're
na lang.
saying it's comparable to Eugene Sue.
Exactly. So, like... But you cannot make accusations against Nick Joaquin like that. He was like as original as it can get. And considering he didn't have the privilege of going to the best schools on earth as Rizal. In the case of Nick Joaquin, he didn't even graduate from high school last time I checked. So I would say.
So I'm gonna say that I actually agree that there are certain Filipinos na sabihin na lang natin, we're not judging them by Filipino criteria, we're judging them by global criteria, right? Kasi sometimes, for example, somebody I hate, Amor Solo. I guess he's good by Philippine criteria because he like represented the Filipino pastoral and he's good to reproduce, and put him in your dining room, especially if the dining room is like old school Filipino dining room na may
Parang ni Lola, mga ganun, no?
may spoon and fork, di ba? Kung pwede siyang
Correct.
pwede siyang
Correct.
pangkatitahan. So
Correct.
yes, by Philippine criteria is great, or somebody like whatever. I don't know. Sa Amosolo lang naisip ko. But there are really some Filipinos with Filipino artists who magaling lang sila, and they're not magaling because they represent a distinctly Filipino experience, or they make a particular argument to Filipinos. They're just good, and I think we should start doing that from time to time.
Okay,
Yes, some
I get
artists
you,
need to
Lele.
be assessed based on how they respond to Filipino realities and how they talk
Right.
to Filipino audience. I think the Eraserheads, especially the early Eraserheads, should be assessed based on that criteria. But there are certain artists who I think na parang ang galing mo lang on a global level, and you should be and your criteria should be like, can we compare them to certain masters who have gained recognition globally? I think definitely Woman Who Had Two Navels ni Joaquin should be assessed on that criteria, right? It should be comparable to Latin American literature, right? I think I think somebody like Locsin should be comparable to Le Corbusier.
The architectural,
I think like somebody like I don't know. I'm not so familiar with this, but I think Constancio Bernardo should be considered alongside the New York Abstract Expressionists, because he was part of New York Abstract
Interesting.
Expressionism. There are some people working in poetry who think Villa should be considered as part of kind of like beat poetry, New York beat poetry, and I think these are fair arguments. And so can you make the argument that Luna should be considered part of the pantheon of kind of Madrileño Parisian elite painters from elite painters from this period? I don't know. I'm not an art historian, so I can't assess the quality as well as people who have background in this. But you should be willing to make that position. Parang this is not just a Filipino artist.
I'll ask you a question short, but let me just make an intervention first. The thing is, first of all, they didn't have Rizal singing praises to them, right? The Hotel Ingles speech of Rizal was like, whoa. So I think the Rizal imprimatur kind of further glorifies the achievement of Felix Hidalgo and of course also Juan Luna. But the other thing, I don't know, bro, for me, greatness is not only what you achieve for yourself, but you achieving it for yourself, but also for something bigger than yourself, right? So you tick both artistic, aesthetic, and political boxes, and I think that's where Juan Luna is special. But having said that, this is my question, and you can see what the question is already implying. Do you have a sense that the Illustrado generation kind of crowded out everyone else? Because that's your argument, right? Like, why are we not paying attention to everyone else who came after? I always say, why are we always talking about Rizal? Why not Nick Joaquin? He had fantastic work. I can also make an argument for Sionel Jose, for instance, right? Na parang the romanticism of their era kind of took away the light from the others. And it doesn't have to be an either or. I mean, for me, we have to have greatness every generation, right? If greatness has no country, I would say greatness has no generation too. Each generation will produce, ay, ang ganda nun, ah. I like that. Let me note that down. Right? Like, greatness has no generation. Every generation is creating its own greatness. So why are we always going back to them and assuming they are the gold standard when they did their thing during their time and we are all doing during our own time, right? Ay gusto ko sinabi ko, ah.
And then as I say, there are naman like people like Luna na who will just beat the white people at their own game until today. And we should celebrate that. If I were to push back a little bit, all I'll say is that we do celebrate people like Luna, and I think the person we celebrate in the same way maybe Sina Rizal celebrated Luna is Lea Salonga.
I thought you said Manny Pacquiao.
Well, Manny Pacquiao, yeah. Pero in the artistic realm,
Yeah.
Lea Salonga, yeah. I remember I took a music class under Jim Paredes in college. And
Really?
Jim said there are kind of two ways in which a Filipino musician makes it big internationally. Either through either the Freddie Aguilar route, where you write a very Filipino song called Anak, and then it gets translated, and then that's what becomes globalized.
Yeah.
Or you have, or through the Lea Salonga route, where you're just so good, you beat the Westerners at their own game, you win a Tony, right?
Yeah.
So you
I see.
you
Inductive, deductive. Yes, exactly.
And I think in a way, would you say ultimately we celebrate Leia more than Freddie? even though both of them had like complex relationships with Duterte and Marcos.
I mean, complex is a nice way of putting it, especially in the case of Fred Aguilar, right? Like, and Fred Aguilar is getting canceled for other reasons too, aside from Duterte. But I don't want to
Wow.
get there. Just last point, bro. Do you have like a soft spot for the Illustrados? Like, how do you feel about our generation? I don't want to be presumptuous, but like, when you think of their generation, do you feel insecure that our generation is not doing enough, or you think we're doing pretty good given the circumstances we're also facing today? Because back then, their competition probably was smaller even than us, right? Like today, like there's so many, like ako, ang dami vloggers na kailangan ko i-compete, right? Compared to like, you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, this is a world of 8-9 billion people we're talking about. And it's not like before you make it to one elite school and then you're made. No, because there are like hundreds of elite schools around the world, right? So, like, I get it that they deserve recognition, but I hope people also appreciate what we're facing. Yes, we're not under American or Spanish colonialism, but our generation is also dealing with the loss. I mean, in short, what is the argument for the millennial Illustrado? Like, I don't know. I'm
Wala,
sounding
Brad.
horrible, but go ahead.
All let's time. Ewan ko, ako historian ako, so I'm
Yeah.
just like gonna say, we probably all failed in comparison, and
That's
wala
it.
tayong
It's
magagawa.
over. It's over.
Historian, you're not gonna convince a historian to write about any other generation the way they write about Illustrados. That may be an unfortunate truth, but it's just so I think it's just so rarefied.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is deserving. At least when it comes to Rizal, I think Pepe really deserves the kind of adulation just because yung
Right.
breadth, yung scope,
Yep.
grabe,
Yep.
grabe talaga. Tsaka, of course, yung bravery combined with the kind of bravery that you don't see with the other people. So this is a kind of rare
You're right.
combination of universal genius and bravery. Na parang ang hirap
Yeah,
tawaran.
yeah, yeah. Audacity and genius and
That's
talent. Yeah, that's a quite. Yeah, I would say you're right. You're right. I mean, you're right.
I think we will all be. I mean, we'll probably all. Most generations of Filipinos will be dwarfed by the big giant in the room, and that's the result. And I do think the result deserves pride of place, diba? Sabi nga ni Nick Joaquin, he was the primus inter pares of the Illustrados.
Absolutely.
Totoo naman.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just saying, like 100 years from now, what can our generation do to be worth remembering? Like, especially like the historian, the Leloy of 2123 or whatever. Like, kasi ganito, bro. The reason I'm talking about this is because, aside from the Illustrado, the other comparable group that has inspired me a lot, you can already see it here, is the Russian intelligentsia, right? From Turgenev onwards, right? And today, I look at Navalny, and I would say he's continuing the same spirit. I mean, literally, Navalny now is somewhere in, I don't know, Siberia, whatever, and he's reading the spiritual books. Like, you can imagine, through his mind and soul, is passing the same light that passed through the soul of Dostoevsky, right? Before he was executed. You get what I'm saying? Like, there's this intensity and seriousness about Navalny that helps me imagine Dostoevsky or Tolstoy at their finest moment. You get what I'm saying? Like, when I watch Navalny at his craziest audacity level, it's like, no shit, I see what Dostoevsky and those guys were talking about. Like,
interesting.
you get what I'm saying? Like, I think this is where the comparative in me comes in, no? Like, parang, that's the comparison I'm looking at. Like, because the Illustrados were just as amazing as the Russian intelligentsia, and more than 100 years later, you have someone like Navalny who uses TikTok to challenge Vladimir Putin and KGB. So like, so parang you're saying na because they got Putin and we got BBM, you know what I'm saying? Like, we got Duterte. You get what I'm saying? I'm just saying, like, in Russia, you're seeing the recurrence, almost eternal recurrence of the same serious, almost, I mean, how could I put it? Like, almost transcendental spirit of defiance that we saw with the Russian intelligentsia. So there are two groups that, I mean, all due respect to the Young Turks, I have a lot of respect for the Young Turks and what they did in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, like, I have ancestry from a region there, whatever. But my point is, the Russian intelligentsia were always my inspiration. And I always look at the Illustrados, and then I'm looking like 100 years later, Russia is still creating great people. Can't we do the same thing? I mean, we're not as big as... But you get what I'm saying? Like, I'm just coming from that angle. Maybe I'm just hallucinating, whatever. You tell me, bro.
But
Am I making sense? Yeah.
I would agree. We have a heritage, and all we can do is draw from it, and let the people after us decide how well we've drawn from that heritage of critical thinking. Carol Howe, diba, it actually says na it's so difficult to define Illustrado because Illustrado, some people say Illustrado is expatriate. Well, Isabelo de los Reyes, his only experience abroad was when he was jailed abroad. He really didn't have expatriate experience. Well, he stayed on, but most of his career was actually spent in the Philippines. It's not necessarily class because you have somebody like Mabini who's not really that rich and yet he's considered Illustrado, right? It's not necessarily being metropolitan. It's not necessarily being metropolitan in origin because actually you have Bromdies like Rizal who become Illustrado. So what is Illustrado? And Carol says that it's really just illustration to be enlightened. It is a critical position. It is a critical position relative to your own society. It's the capacity, in Rizal's words, to say that there is a cancer in your society and to be able to identify the nodes of that particular cancer. I think that's ultimately what Illustrado is. And so in a sense, it's a kind of wokeness. Sa Pilipinas, sabi natin mulat. We're awake to certain issues. Mulat.
Correct.
And so kung yun yung pagiging Illustrado, and if it's that broad, then I think we can really just there's always ways to tap into that spirit of being mulat, being woke, being critical, being able to distance yourself from your society, and of course, in the words of Rizal via Benedict Anderson, to see the specters of comparison, to be able to compare your society with other societies. I think if we do that, then yung heritage ng Illustrados, we can keep it alive, and that's all we can do, right? If we can compete with them, I don't think so. So if you can't compete with them, why don't we just channel them the way I think Jan Navalny channels them?
Exactly. Channeling, that's the exact word for that. I mean, for me it's homage, right? It's paying homage to them. That's the
I like
less.
that word. Yeah.
It's homage. For me it's homage. Like we owe it to them. Na ayusin naman natin. Nakakaya naman. Let's not be so whiny. I don't even want to use the word woke. Like I don't want to be whiny enough that like those guys faced horrible imperialism, racism, all sorts of problems that thankfully we're facing at a far lower level nowadays, right? Whatever you want to say about new colonialism, racism, it's nothing compared to what our forefathers and foremothers were facing. So, yun lang. Sana one of the things I think we have to learn from them is grittiness. Not only but gritty, like against all odds. Damn, we're gonna beat you in your game, and that's really what I appreciate about it. And let's not forget, Rizal was younger than us, right? Like 35, 34, right? Yeah.
Yung isa pa, Brad, Look to the World, di ba?
Yes.
Megan Thomas.
Nexus.
Great account of Illustrados, di ba? She calls the Illustrados worldly colonials. I think that's such a great term to think about these people as worldly colonials. And if you look at the pages of La Solidaridad, it's not just about the Philippines. It's about Cuba. It's about all of the colonized world. So there's really this sense that you really can't learn about your country unless you're learning about the world. So compare, read international news. I mean, this is the entire point of this podcast. You can't understand your country without looking at the world.
Nexus, exactly. So I'm glad about this episode because it's also an homage to our own episode, which is an homage to, it's like a homage squared, no? I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I mean, no, yeah. Genius knows no generation. I like it. I like our conversation because stuff pop up there and like, oh yeah, that was at the back of my mind. So I'm very, very grateful for you. On that note, thank you very much, Luna. Leloy, on that fantastic exposition, right? Exposition. All right. You still good for another one or you want to do next time? Just short.
I'm doing natin. Sige.
Yeah, I'll just change my hat lang. Just to change it, yeah.
Sige ako rin.
Oh, yeah, palit tayo para lang kunyari it's different. That's it.
Ayan.
That's it. That's it. It's a wrap. Oh, similar tayo ng color coded That's it. As they say, makulit minds think alike. All right. Let's do this. Duterte, Uniteam no more, something like that. After Uniteam, charot. Wait lang.
Huh?
Wait lang. 1 second. Let me just turn off the live here. I just want to ask you.
Cold War.
Yeah, but I want to ask you just something.